The grand halls of Westbridge University hummed with life as students shuffled through the corridors, their voices merging into a symphony of youthful energy. It was the beginning of the semester, and the air was filled with anticipation, dreams, and silent battles yet to be fought. Amara Washington clutched the straps of her backpack tightly as she maneuvered through the crowded hallway. Her dark brown curls framed her face, and her deep, inquisitive eyes scanned the plaques on the wooden doors, searching for room 300 for her first class of the day. She had worked relentlessly to get here, earning a full academic scholarship despite the odds stacked against her. Westbridge University was prestigious, filled with students from generational wealth, the kind who had never known what it meant to struggle. Amara, however, had clawed her way to this moment, and she wasn't about to let anything ruin it. She finally found room 304, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The lecture hall was spacious, with tall windows that allowed the morning sunlight to spill in. The students inside were already seated, their eyes flickering toward her as she made her way to an empty chair near the front. Amara could feel the weight of their stares, some curious, others indifferent, and a few laced with something she had come to recognize too well, judgment. As she settled into her seat, a sharp, condescending voice sliced through the air. "You must be lost," the voice said. Amara turned her head to see an elderly white man standing at the front of the class. He was tall and wiry, his thin silver hair combed neatly back. His suit was crisp, his posture rigid. His piercing blue eyes bore into her with something between disapproval and disdain. "I don't think so," Amara said calmly. "This is Political Science 101, right?" The man chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "I know my class list, and I don't recall any people like you being enrolled here." The room went silent. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Amara felt her pulse quicken, but she held her ground. "My name is Amara Washington," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here on a full scholarship." The old man's lip curled into a sneer. "A scholarship, of course, affirmative action at its finest." His tone dripped with condescension. "Tell me, Miss Washington, what exactly did you do to deserve a spot at Westbridge? Did you check a few diversity boxes?" A murmur ran through the room. A few students shifted, eyes darting between the professor and Amara. Her hands clenched into fists beneath the desk. She had encountered racism before, but never so brazen, never from a professor standing in front of an entire class. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, a mix of anger and humiliation burning beneath her skin. She opened her mouth to respond, but the professor wasn't finished. Westbridge has always been a place of excellence, built by men and women who earned their place here, he continued, pacing slowly in front of the class. But these days, standards have dropped. They let in anyone, even those from ... slums. That's where you come from, isn't it? The words hit like a slap. Go back to your slums, you don't belong here. A sharp gasp echoed through the room. A few students looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. Others whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from discomfort to silent agreement. Amara's throat tightened, but she refused to let herself shrink under his gaze. "I belong here just as much as anyone else," she said firmly. The professor chuckled again, shaking his head. "We'll see about that, won't we?" He turned back to the whiteboard and began writing, as if the conversation had never happened. The rest of the class was a blur. Amara could barely focus on the words coming out of his mouth. The weight of the insults sat heavy on her chest, but beneath the hurt, something else simmered defiance. She would not let him break her. When the class ended, she gathered her things quickly. As she turned to leave, a girl with long blonde hair approached her hesitantly. "Hey," the girl said softly. "That was really messed up." Amara studied her carefully. She seemed sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough. "You didn't say anything," Amara replied, her voice measured. The girl looked away, guilt flickering across her face. "I know," she admitted. "I should have. But he's powerful. He could ruin people's futures." Amara scoffed. And what about my future? The girl didn't have an answer. As Amara walked out of the lecture hall, she could feel the stares following her. Some pitied her, some resented her, and some, like the professor, wished she would disappear. But she wouldn't. She would fight, and she would win. Amara stormed out of the lecture hall, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The words still echoed in her head. Go back to your slums. You don't belong here. She had prepared herself for challenges at Westbridge, but she had never expected such blatant racism from a professor on her first day. Her chest burned with anger, but she knew she couldn't afford to lose control. She had worked too hard to be here, and no bitter old man was going to take this away from her. As she reached the courtyard, the cool autumn breeze did little to soothe the storm raging inside her. Students milled about, chatting in groups, sipping coffee, scrolling through their phones. To them, it was just another day, but for Amara it felt like war had been declared. She pulled out her phone and dialed the one person who always knew what to say, her mother. Amara. Her mother's warm voice answered almost immediately. How's your first day going, baby? Amara hesitated, her throat tightening. She could picture her mother standing in their small kitchen back home, probably wiping her hands on an old dish towel, worrying already creeping into her voice. She didn't want to stress her, but she also couldn't hold it in. Ma, my professor humiliated me in front of the whole class, she said, her voice low but steady. A pause. What happened? Amara exhaled, recounting the encounter word for word. With each sentence, her mother's silence grew heavier. When she finished, there was a long pause before her mother finally spoke. Baby, listen to me, she said, her voice calm but firm. I know this hurts. I know it's unfair. But you are not walking away from that school. You worked too hard to get there. I know, Ma. But I don't care what he said. Her mother cut in. What do we do when people try to tell us we don't belong? Amara closed her eyes. She knew the answer. She had heard it since she was a little girl. We prove them wrong. That's right. Her mother's voice was steady, but Amara could hear the anger simmering beneath it. You belong there, Amara, more than that racist old fool could ever understand. And if he thinks he can push you out, he's got another thing coming. Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. Thanks, Ma. Now, are you gonna let this man take your dream away? Amara straightened her spine. No? Good. Now go back in there and show them who you are. Amara hung up, her heart steadier now. Her mother was right. She wasn't going to let one professor ruin her, but she wasn't going to stay silent either. Later that afternoon, Amara sat in the student union, her laptop open in front of her. She had done her research. Professor William Caldwell had been at Westbridge for nearly 30 years. He was known for his sharp mind, but also for his outdated views. Over the years, students had complained about his behavior, but nothing had ever been done. He was untouchable. Amara stared at the blank document on her screen. If no one else was going to say something, then she would. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard when a voice interrupted her thoughts. You really pissed him off. Huh? Amara looked up to see a guy with dark brown skin and sharp, intelligent eyes sliding into the seat across from her. His hoodie was pulled up, but she could see the faint outline of tight curls peeking from beneath it. And you are? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Zane Carter? He said, extending a hand. Senior, political science major, also a proud thorn in Caldwell's side. Amara shook his hand cautiously. So, you've had him before. Zane leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Had him. I'd survived him. Caldwell's been saying the same racist crap for years. He just knows how to do it in a way that won't get him fired. Amara clenched her jaw. And no one's done anything. Zane sighed. Plenty of people have tried, but Westbridge protects its own. And Caldwell, he's one of theirs. Old money, deep connections. Every time someone complains, it gets investigated and then quietly disappears. Amara stared at him. So what? We just let him get away with it. Zane grinned. Who said anything about letting him get away with it? Amara leaned in. What do you mean? Zane glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Then he lowered his voice. There's a way to take him down, but it's not easy. Amara felt a spark of determination. Tell me. Zane hesitated for a moment before nodding. Meet me at the library tonight. I'll explain everything then. Amara's heart pounded with anticipation. She wasn't going to let Caldwell win, not without a fight. Amara arrived at the Westbridge University Library just as the large clock in the courtyard struck 9 p.m. The building loomed over her, its Gothic architecture casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and the quiet murmurs of students cramming for exams. She spotted Zane in a secluded corner, hunched over his laptop, a half-empty cup of coffee beside him. He glanced up as she approached, his sharp eyes scanning the room before gesturing for her to sit. You actually showed up, he said with a smirk. Amara crossed her arms. You said you had a plan. Zane leaned back, tapping his fingers against the table. Caldwell's been a problem for years, but like I said, he's protected. Complaints don't stick. Protests get ignored. And let's not even talk about the administration. They'd rather bury a scandal than fix it. Amara frowned. So, what's the solution? Zane's smirk faded. Exposure. The kind they can't ignore. Amara leaned in. You're talking about recording him. Zane nodded. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We need evidence. Solid, undeniable proof that Caldwell is exactly who we say he is. If we get it, we can take it to the media. Social media. News outlets, hell. Even the school board won't be able to sweep it under the rug. If enough people are watching. Zane nodded. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We need evidence. Solid, undeniable proof that Caldwell is exactly who we say he is. If we get it, we can take it to the media. Social media. News outlets, hell. Even the school board won't be able to sweep it under the rug. If enough people are watching. Amara's mind raced. It was risky. If Caldwell caught on, he could make her life a living hell. He had power, connections. He could fail her, ruin her academic standing. But what was the alternative? Stay silent. Let him continue humiliating students like her. She straightened her back. How do we do it? Zane grinned. That's what I like to hear. He pulled out a small recording device from his pocket. This is what we'll use. It's small, easy to hide. Your job is to get him to say something, incriminating, something worse than what he already said. Amara scoffed. You mean worse than go back to your slums? Zane shrugged. Guys like him always do. The key is making sure we have it on record. Amara exhaled. And what happens after we get the recording? Zane's expression darkened. We make sure the whole world hears it. The next day, Amara walked into Caldwell's class with a new sense of purpose. She had hidden the recording device inside her sleeve, the tiny red light blinking softly. It was game time. Caldwell stood at the front of the room, flipping through a stack of papers. He barely looked up as the students shuffled into their seats. Pop quiz, he announced. A collective groan rippled through the room. If you actually did the readings, this will be easy. If not, well, she had expected him to be passive-aggressive after their last encounter, but she wouldn't let him rattle her. She kept her head down and focused on the questions. They were tough, but she had studied. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. 20 minutes later, Caldwell collected the papers and paced the room. You know, I've been teaching at this university for a long time. He mused, his voice casual. I've seen generations of students come and go, and I can always tell who belongs and who doesn't. The room tensed. Amara's heart pounded. Amara's heart pounded as she and Zane left the library, their plan forming with each hurried step. The crisp night air did little to cool the fire burning inside her. They had evidence, real evidence, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Zane led her across campus, his hoodie pulled low over his face. We need to be careful, he murmured. If Caldwell or anyone in administration catches wind of what we're doing, they'll shut it down before we get a chance to expose him. Amara nodded, her fists clenched. Then we don't give them the chance. They reached a secluded spot near the student union, where a small group of students huddled under the dim glow of a street lamp. As they approached, a tall girl with short, dyed green hair crossed her arms. "Zane, what's this about?" she asked. "You don't usually call meetings out of nowhere." "This is Amara," Zane said, gesturing toward her. "She's the one Caldwell went after today." The group exchanged glances, a ripple of recognition passing through them. "We heard about it," a guy with glasses said. "It's all over campus. People are pissed, but no one knows what to do. That's why we're here," Amara said, stepping forward. "Zane's been gathering evidence. We're going to expose Caldwell once and for all." A murmur spread through the group. Some looked excited, others hesitant. "Exposing him is one thing," green-haired girl said, "but what makes you think it'll stick?" "The administration has buried complaints before. Because this time, we're not just filing complaints," Zane said, "we're making sure the whole world sees it." He pulled out his phone and played the recording. The group went silent as Caldwell's voice crackled through the speaker, dripping with condescension and hate. When it ended, there was a long pause. Then, green-haired girl grinned. "Okay," she said. "I'm in." The others nodded in agreement. "Then let's get to work," Amara said. Over the next few days, they executed their plan with precision. Zane and Amara recorded more of Caldwell's classes, catching every microaggression, every snide remark, every moment he let his mask slip. They gathered testimonies from past students who had been targeted, compiling their stories into a damning collection of proof. Green-haired girl whose real name was Riley used her tech skills to dig into Caldwell's past, uncovering hidden reports, buried complaints, and questionable financial dealings within the university. And finally, they prepared their trump card, a live confrontation. "Are you sure about this?" Zane asked, as they sat in a quiet corner of the student lounge, going over their final plan. "Confronting him in public is dangerous. If we slip up, he'll twist it in his favor." Amara's jaw tightened. "We won't slip up." Zane studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's make history." The lecture hall was packed the next morning, students filing in with an energy that felt different, charged, expected. Word had spread that something was about to happen. Amara sat near the front, her fingers curled around her phone. Zane sat beside her, his own phone ready to record. Riley and the others were scattered throughout the room, strategically placed for what was about to unfold. At exactly 10 a.m., Caldwell walked in, his usual air of superiority intact. "Good morning, class," he said, placing his briefcase on the desk. Before he could begin his lecture, Amara stood up. "Professor Caldwell," she said, her voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can I ask you something?" Caldwell barely spared her a glance. "Miss Washington, this is not the time for—" "Actually, I think it is," she interrupted. Murmurs spread through the room. Phones were raised, cameras rolling. Caldwell finally looked at her, his expression hardening. "Sit down, Miss Washington." Amara didn't move. "I just wanted to clarify something," she said, pulling out her phone. "Because yesterday, you said students like me don't belong here, that I should go back to my slums." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Caldwell's eyes darkened. "That is an outrageous accusation." "Is it?" Zane's voice cut in as he pressed play on his phone. Caldwell's own words filled the room, playing back in crisp clarity. "Go back to your slums. You don't belong here." Silence. Then, whispers. A few shocked exclamations. The energy in the room shifted as the weight of the evidence sank in. Caldwell's face paled. "This is an attack," he snapped. "This is slander." "It's the truth," Amara said, "and the whole world is about to hear it." With that, Riley had sent. The video, along with all their gathered evidence, was uploaded. Caldwell wasn't untouchable anymore. The next few hours were a blur of chaos. Amara, Zane, Riley, and the rest of their crew watched as the video of Caldwell's racism spread like wildfire. Within minutes, students who had been unaware were now sharing it on social media, tagging each other, and commenting with disbelief. The university's administration was already scrambling to respond, but it was too late. The video had already gone viral. Amara sat in the student lounge, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Messages from friends, messages from strangers. Everyone had seen the video. It was everywhere. She glanced at Zane, who was pacing the room, his phone glued to his ear. "They're coming after us," he said, voice low. "The administration's in full damage control mode. They're denying everything." Amara set her phone down, her hands shaking slightly. "What about Caldwell?" Zane paused, rubbing his temple. "He's denying it too, saying the recording was tampered with, that it was taken out of context. But the thing is, the more they deny it, the worse it looks. People are starting to come forward with their own stories." Amar's eyes narrowed. "He can't hide forever." "No, he can't," Zane agreed. "But we need to keep the pressure on. We've already won the battle, but now we have to make sure we win the war." A message popped up on Amar's screen. It was from her mother. "Baby, I saw the video. I'm so proud of you. They can't silence you now. Stay strong." Amara smiled, feeling a rush of warmth. Her mother's support had always been her foundation, and now as everything they'd worked for began to unravel around them, Amara knew there was no turning back. But the fight wasn't over. The next day, the university called a town hall meeting to address the controversy. It was a calculated move, one designed to control the narrative. The administration wanted to appear as though they were taking action to quell the rising tide of outrage from students and alumni alike. Amara knew this was her chance to finish what she'd started. She wasn't just going to sit back and watch them sweep it under the rug. Zane, Riley, and the others met her in the campus quad before the meeting, their faces a mixture of determination and resolve. "Ready for this?" Zane asked, his voice low but confident. Amara nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "Let's make sure Caldwell doesn't walk away from this." They walked together toward the auditorium where the meeting was being held. The doors were already guarded by university security, but Zane flashed his ID, and they were allowed to enter without incident. The room was packed, students filled the rows, and the air was thick with tension. The stage at the front was occupied by university officials, including the president of the university, who appeared calm but far from unbothered. Caldwell sat among them, his expression stiff, though the sweat on his brow betrayed his anxiety. Amara took a seat near the front, Zane beside her. Riley and the others took their places around the room, waiting for the signal to act. The meeting began, and the president stood at the podium, addressing the crowd. "We understand the gravity of the situation and the hurt that has been caused by recent events," he said, his voice measured. "We are investigating the claims made against Professor Caldwell, and we assure you that any actions deemed necessary will be taken." The crowd murmured in response. Some students were angry, some were skeptical. No one trusted the administration. Amara's hand clenched around the edge of her seat. She could see Caldwell's jaw clenching as well, his eyes darting around nervously. This was his worst nightmare come true. As the president continued to speak, Amara stood. She didn't shout, didn't make a dramatic entrance, but the room fell silent when she stepped to the front. "Excuse me," Amara said, her voice steady but caring. "I'd like to say something." The president glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Miss Washington, this is not the time." "I think it's the perfect time," Amara interrupted, her gaze never leaving the president, "because this isn't just about one professor. This is about the system that allows people like him to thrive while students like me are treated like garbage." A ripple of tension spread through the room. Amara turned to face Caldwell. "You don't get to sit here and pretend like you didn't say what you said. You don't get to play the victim now that your hate is exposed. You've been getting away with this for too long." Caldwell opened his mouth to speak, but Amara raised her hand to silence him. "No, you don't get to speak," she said, her voice hard. "Not until you acknowledge what you did. Not until you admit that you've been a racist, bigoted excuse for a professor." Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. The room was silent as everyone waited for Caldwell's response. But the only thing he could do was sit there, looking defeated. The room held its breath, the silence thick with the weight of Amra's words. Caldwell sat motionless, his usual arrogant demeanor replaced by an unnerving stillness. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The other university officials exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the fragile state of the situation. Amara stood firm, her gaze unwavering. "You want to say something now?" she asked Caldwell, her voice cold but full of resolve. "Or will you keep hiding behind your misunderstood excuses?" For a moment, it seemed as if Caldwell might speak, to say something, anything, but he didn't. The anger and disdain that had once been so readily available to him, that he'd used to belittle Amara, now seemed out of his grasp. The president cleared his throat, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Miss Washington, I believe we've heard enough for now. I assure you the university is taking this matter very seriously." Amra's eyes flicked to the president. "Oh, really?" She took a step forward, her voice rising. "Because all I've seen so far is a university trying to cover up a professor's behavior because he's been here for too long. Don't you dare act like you're doing anything." A few students in the audience started to clap, their voices rising in support. The room buzzed with energy, the tension building. Caldwell's head snapped up, his face reddening with fury. Finally, he stood, attempting to assert some authority. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I don't have to take this from you, Miss Washington." Before he could continue, Riley stood up from the back of the room, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Oh, but you do. You have to take it, Caldwell. You don't get to hide anymore. You don't get to make people suffer for your ignorance and bigotry." The crowd erupted in cheers, the students rallying behind Riley's words. The administrators were visibly shaken now, no longer able to control the narrative. Amara moved closer to the front, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had done her part. They had all done their part. Zane stood from his seat, joining them at the front of the room. "This isn't just about one professor," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is about a culture of silence and complicity that allows racism to thrive in places that are supposed to be inclusive and safe. It's about time we start holding these institutions accountable." The students erupted again, some standing and clapping, others chanting, "Hold them accountable." In that moment, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a quiet, powerful force, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Caldwell's face twisted with anger, but the power he once had was slipping through his fingers. He shot a look at the president, who finally rose from his seat. The president's voice cracked as he addressed the crowd, trying to regain control. "We will conduct a thorough investigation into these claims. Rest assured, the university takes allegations of racism very seriously." The crowd wasn't buying it. "We've heard that before," someone shouted from the back. Amara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "We don't want your empty promises. We want real change. We want Caldwell gone." Caldwell's face paled. He looked from Amara to the students who were now chanting in support of her. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "Let's vote," someone shouted from the back. "We want him gone." The president hesitated. He knew the power of the moment. If the students voted, there would be no going back. But he also knew the backlash from the alumni, from the donors, would be swift and fierce. But this time, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the students. It was about them, their voices, their power. I agreed," the president said finally, his voice heavy with reluctance. "We will review Caldwell's position here at the university immediately." The room erupted in applause. The students had won. Amara couldn't help but smile as the noise surged around her. She looked at Zane, Riley, and the others. This was just the beginning. Caldwell stood there, defeated, the weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on him. There was no escape. His time at Westbridge University had come to an end. Amara turned toward the exit, her heart soaring. She had fought not just for herself, but for every student who had ever been silenced by the system. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a journey worth taking. And in that moment, she knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger change.